Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down those unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Our guest today joining us, she's back in South Florida right now, and joining us today, Abi Horton, dedicated hospitality professional, known for her passion for exceptional guest experiences, relationship building, and operational excellence. Abi runs and founds, which we'll get into it, but Aros Hospitality, right? Midterm rental. I'm probably not doing it justice, and you'll clear me up a little bit, but taking these homes, these beautiful spaces, and creating a real seamless experience for people that want to generate income from their property, or if you're on the other side, find a great home, seamless process if you are looking to rent, find a short-term rental, or midterm rental, I guess was what we were talking about earlier. But Abi has built a reputation for bringing a thoughtful, people-first approach to every project and interaction, combining professionalism, creativity, strong attention to detail. And Abi, I'm stoked to have you here.
Yeah.
How the heck are you? Thanks for spending some time with us. I know it's getting late Friday evening where you are, so just before the weekend, you're here spending some time with us on the microphone, being a few hours ahead of us.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Thank you for having me. Excited to chat.
So let me clear that up, because I had said short-term rentals, but you're mostly the business is shaped around midterm or longer-term rentals. Is short-term rentals something that you focus on, or like where do we draw the line between short-term, midterm, and then what would be considered a long-term?
Yeah, so great question. I think that midterm rentals has become a bit of a buzzword lately,
Okay.
but monthly rentals has been around for decades.
Yeah.
Corporate housing, monthly rentals, it's always been around. But I think since the explosion of short-term rentals in the last 10 years or so, naturally we've found this midterm rental spot, which just makes sense, because you've got long-term rentals, which is like 12 months or more. Then you've got short-term rentals, which is generally an average of like 7 days.
Yeah.
And then you've got this midterm rental space, which is no less than 1 month. So 1 month or more. And typically we say 1 to 6 months. But a lot of the leases that we're dealing with often go more than 6 months, sometimes even 12 months.
Yeah, I was actually speaking with another woman from Florida, and she was purchasing development properties and renovating them, restoring them in the Miami area, in the South Florida area. And that was one thing that I had asked her as well. It's like, okay, well, what's the goal here? And she said, we're not doing any short-term rentals, but month-to-month rentals is a great option for us. And I started to dig in and was asking why. And she said, well, if we have a year-long lease and we want to, or a year-long or 2-year-long lease, and we want to get in and renovate any of the spaces, it's going to be much more difficult to relocate them or deal with them. And then you have the tenancy board, and there's laws there that are going to start to really affect it. So she said for her, the sweet spot was actually month-to-month rentals. It seemed to give their business model a lot more flexibility in what they wanted to do, but also didn't have to deal with the obvious headaches that come along with the short-term rentals and the 2-night stays, the 3-night stays, that type of thing. But curious, why specifically, monthly rentals? Why not long-term rentals? Is that just because you're some of the people that you host for, maybe you want to go back and use the space themselves and want some more flexibility, or have you found that this is a better business model?
Yeah, for me, I think it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the midterm rental space offered the maximum ROI for the least amount of work.
Okay,
So
tell me more about that, because there's a lot of people that are thinking about it.
for sure.
It's pretty common here where, the midterm rentals aren't, or they're less desirable, or and getting a long-term tenant in, like, there's something to be said about putting in a long-term tenant, securing revenue for a year, 2 years. But you only sort of have the ability to increase rent by, where we are, a very small percentage year over year. And so that can become challenging. But yeah, please lean
Yeah.
in. Tell me more.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people like the stability of having long-term tenants in there, but for me, I think I realized uh, there's still a lot of places where short-term rentals work. And, especially if you're in, a high tourist area, then short-term rentals can be a great option. But for me personally, I didn't want the work of having to do high turnovers. A few night stays, you have to organize the cleaner, you have to organize, the turnover again. And then you've got new guests coming in that maybe don't know how to work the coffee machine, or they don't know how to use things, or they might be careless, or they might be maybe coming and having parties, or there was so many reasons why I was really kind of turned off from short-term rentals, not to mention the fact that when I was kind of getting into this in like 2023, 2022, 2023, there was a lot of buzz about regulations and permits
Huge.
being needed for short-term rentals, and it felt like a really uncertain space to be in. And so midterm rentals just seemed more appealing all around. And so I was like, all right, if I'm going to learn about midterm rentals, I want to go all in and learn all about midterm rentals and figure out, because as you know, there's so many different ways to make money in real estate. You can do within real estate investing, there's so many avenues that you can take. And so I had already started learning about, wholesaling and fix and flips. And, there was a lot of different areas that I was understanding, and I knew I wanted to buy and hold. And so I figured, I found a place, and the numbers panned out as a long term and as a midterm. And I thought, you know what, let's just try it. Let's see what happens. And so I started learning about midterm rentals, and the more I learned, the more I understood these kind of different niches that need midterm rentals. And I think a lot of people associate traveling nurses as being this midterm rental niche. But that industry has changed a lot, especially since COVID. But there's also other pockets of people that need midterm rentals too. And so I decided to kind of lean into this insurance relocation niche.
I was going to
And
say, yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I
please,
was going to say, like, that's to me seems like a great option. And in fact, the insurance side is something that I've been encouraging a client of mine who has a property to lean into, because he's having difficulty renting it and he doesn't want to commit to a long term,
mhm.
and he wants to get somebody in there to cover the mortgage and the financing payments for, the next sort of 4 or 5 months while maybe it sits on the market. And so, yeah. And anyways, sorry to
Yeah,
cut you off. I just got
no,
excited. Like, as soon
no.
as you said that, I was like, this is exactly the playbook that I was talking about just the other day.
Yeah, no, yeah, and please jump in because sometimes I'll get on a roll. Yeah, but it was a real eye opener to understand when I started learning more about insurance relocations, because you could there's a need for insurance housing everywhere. And, that also doesn't just come in one shape or size. I think we associate a lot of the traveling nurse options now really with like 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, kind of low cost. As I said, that has changed a lot. And I think during COVID, they got really big stipends and they were spending a lot of money on housing. And as the stipends got lower and the need for traveling nurses has decreased somewhat, that they just weren't getting paid the same way, and so they weren't able to spend all this money on housing. And so now they're looking for much more affordable options, 1 or 2 bedroom apartments that just has what they need so they can go and do their job at the hospital or whatever it is. And so the thing with insurance housing is they want to find as close to what the family is coming from. That could be a 1 bedroom apartment, or it could be a 3 bed, 2 bath, or it could be a 5 bedroom townhouse, or it could be in the suburbs, or it could be in the city, or, there's really no rule book for this. And so it's really great to kind of keep your options open. And I, as a landlord, I think everybody should do that, and I don't do short-term rentals, but a lot of people do this short-term, midterm hybrid. So fill in the gaps with last-minute short-term stays and then kind of target for the midterm stays in general. I don't tend to do that, and I'm fine without it, but I think that is quite market dependent.
Yeah. You came from if anybody's listening here, you do have a bit of a UK accent, which is awesome. Where in the UK are you from originally?
Do you think it's just a bit? You think I think it has
I mean,
changed.
it's like you're saying, you've been in the States for a while, right? I know, like I do talk to some people for sure, and it's very, very obvious. Yours is obvious, but I feel like, I feel like you probably it's a little softened around the edges more so than some of the people that get on here, and they're like they're freshly in the country. You don't have to tell your family that I said that. I don't know if that's going to be disrespectful. I'm losing my way, but I do have a friend here, very from Australia, right? Great friend, and he to me sounds like he's from Australia, but then you get his brothers over here and his family. It's like, okay, you're really losing your accent there. Anyways, I digress. Okay, so you were in the UK, and before you came to the States, you relocated from the States. Where were you based out of?
Yeah, I grew up in the UK. So I was born in Midlands, England, and I lived in London for a while and then moved over here in 2015. So yeah, my family's from South Carolina, so I grew up kind of between both countries anyway, but I officially moved here about 10 years ago.
And then, so this doesn't seem like a necessarily an easy transition, right? If you didn't grow up in the real estate world, real estate investing world, I don't know much about your family, but did you come from a background of sort of self-taught real estate investment families, or where did you start to get this idea of this is where I want to start to invest? Like this is what I want to start to get into.
That's a great question, because I think that for a long time, and I think I still struggle a little bit with this, but I've had a lot of limiting beliefs that, I didn't come from a family of investors. My mum especially was very much a go-getter, and she would DIY everything, so I grew up with her doing a lot of remodeling on the houses that we lived in, and I always had an interest in real estate. And actually my first job ever, my first big girl job, was as a real estate agent in the UK.
Okay.
And so I think I had my taste into real estate at quite a young age. But the investing side, I think for so long I had this limiting belief of like, I don't have enough money. And I didn't even know how much money I needed, but I just didn't have enough. And it was funny because I actually saw a video, I think it was a Bigger Pockets video. Yep. And it was like how to get your first investment property in 90 days or something like that. And for some reason, when I watched that video, it was like something just clicked. It was like a light switch moment for me. And I didn't even follow the exact steps that they were explaining in the video, but something inside of me just clicked, and I just started the wheel rolling. And that's what led me to buy this house and then start getting into midterm rentals. And that's really, it completely changed my life, because I didn't realize at that point where that was going to take me. But by kind of just remaining curious and continuing to just put one foot in front of the other and explore different options, it's led me to be a tech founder of a company that we deal with temporary housing. So a wild ride.
Well, this is one of the things, and real quick before we get back to the show, if you have heard anything on this podcast that has resonated with you, or if it's helped you in any way, appreciate more than anything in the world if you could go hit that subscribe button or leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I want to go back to being able to continue to serve and do more and more and help out and get bigger and bigger guests on, better and better. The only way that I can do that is with your help. I'm so honored to be here. Let's get back to the show. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Why I wanted to bring this up was real estate investing, right? People understand the idea of real estate investing. They understand that investing in real estate has been a successful way to generate wealth over hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, right? You have more property, there's less and less property available, value goes up, basic supply and demand. Now, the biggest objection to real estate investing that people have is they say it's very capital intensive, right? It's just what you said. I don't have enough money. I don't know how much money I need, but I just need more. Like that was sort of the mindset that you went into it. And what I'm trying to explain to people is there's more ways than others to invest in a real estate. It's not just saving up a massive down payment of 20 or 30% of $1 million home and then spending that and then having a huge mortgage as an ability to invest in a real estate. There's so many other avenues that don't require that kind of capital up front. And you had mentioned, you were diving into wholesaling and kind of learning about that and fix and flips, and that was something that you had learned a little bit about. But I'm interested because you mentioned it. You said you watched this video and something clicked. And so many people, I think, go their entire life just looking for a moment and hoping for the point where they have that moment where all of a sudden there's a bit of a click.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what you think was going on at that time? Because to find yourself in that moment where you do have that really rapid change of mindset very quickly. I mean, that's what a lot of people hope for, but not a lot of people find ever.
Yeah. I think you make a great point there. And I also want to make it clear that, because I think you're right. I think a lot of people look for that moment that changes everything. And so often it's actually not that moment. And when I break it down for your question, I think in reality, I was in a very desperate place at the time and I was looking for something. I was looking for a change. And I think, realistically, I think at that time I felt very lost. I was kind of struggling with my mental health a bit. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I was doing and where I wasn't it. And so I think that I can describe it as a light bulb moment, but I think it was a combination of a lot of things happening around the same time that made me realize, because I think I could have watched that video 10 times before and been like, and what, And I think that I was in a position where lots of things aligned. And I think you always hear that story of like, oh, I was at rock bottom and then I kind of, it built from there. And I kind of have always felt a bit weird about hearing that, because I don't know if I've ever had like a really rock bottom situation, which I know is a very privileged thing to say, but I think that it's hard then to say, okay, well, how do I find that momentum to have that energy to propel up from rock bottom to get to a really great place or a place of success? And I think everybody's journey is different. Everybody's experiences are different. But for me, I think it's a combination of just finding the discipline to keep going and to keep exploring and really leveling with myself of like, okay, well, is this what I want? And I think that's where I came to the conclusion back in 2022 of, no, it's not. This isn't what I want. This isn't making me happy. I'm not where I want to be. And it kept my mind open to exploring different things. And so when you keep exploring, you're more likely to come across the thing that's going to make you go, oh, that's it. But it's still a process of, we have to keep trying different things, because that, even though I can describe it now as that light bulb moment, that in itself was still a journey. Like I said, that propelled me to start learning about wholesaling and fix and flips. And I very quickly realized that wasn't it. That's not what I wanted to do. But it kept me moving forward to learn about different parts of that. Okay, well, that's not what I want, but what about this? Okay, well, let me learn about this. And I kept going. And then that's when I found midterm rentals, and that opened a door that it piqued my interest. And so I kept kind of pulling the thread, and that's what led me on that journey.
It's you mentioned something about you could have watched that same video 10 times before and nothing would have happened. And that's probably because at some degree you weren't ready for that, right? Your mind was still trying to justify the way that you were living before, the life that you were living, whatever you were doing as still being a reasonable thing. And then there was a decision that was made somewhere along the way where you're like, all right, I'm out, right? I need something. And you're looking for something. And all of a sudden that now stuck out to you. It had been there the whole time. That moment, that thing had always been there, but you're looking at it with a different perspective because you've now let all of this other stuff go. So now you're open and ready and willing to accept all the great things that are coming, and this can be a great conduit to start that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's very easy to recognize that in hindsight. I
In
think
hindsight,
it's easy to look back and realize what that was, but in the moment you don't. But that's why I think it's so important to just to keep exploring, to keep looking for different things that pique your interest. And I mean, all we could, my motto is one foot in front of the other. You know, I just have to, let's not look at the top of the mountain here. Like, what's one thing that I can do that keeps me curious, keeps me learning, maybe introduces me to somebody I hadn't met before. You know, just keep pushing the boundary a little bit further to learn more or be exposed to something that I didn't know before, or a person I didn't know before. And I think it's so key to the journey and just learning new things all the time.
Gary Vaynerchuk, you're familiar with Gary V? Yeah, probably so. He had a number of years ago, he came out with a sneaker that he was calling Clouds and Dirt, right? It was in his whole theory behind Clouds and Dirt was it's like you need to spend time in the clouds, but there's like more often than not, like you need to get into the dirt and do the damn thing, because if you spend so much time in the clouds, it's great. You can live in this beautiful space of creativity and imagination, but practically you're not bringing any sort of value, which means that you're not going to be able to actually build anything. So you need to get into the dirt and you need to focus on the couple of inches that are right in front of you. And people need to realize that there's seasons, there's sprints, there's long distance sections of life where, all right, this might be a dirt moment, and that moment might be a day, it might be an hour, it might be a month or a year where you're focusing, before you can really just get your head up into the clouds again. But it's important to get up there to start seeing, okay, am I on track? My head's been down. I've been putting one foot in front of the other. That's got me this far, but I need to actually get up there and look back at perspective to actually see how far I've come, and also see, am I still on track for either the top of the mountain or the flag or whatever metaphorical, off in the distance goal that you have is still there. Are you still aligned ultimately on where you want to be? And so both are very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm definitely guilty. And I think it's pretty common with entrepreneurs to have that reminder, because I think I often move the goalpost. I extend the flag at the mountain, like I push it further along, and I don't take enough time to actually recognize how far I've come with the original goal. I think, I don't know about you, but certainly for me, and I think with entrepreneurs in general, we tend to move the goalposts a lot.
Oh yeah, in perpetuity. And that's like one thing that I've come to realize is and I was having this conversation with my wife actually, and too, it was like, okay, you get close to hitting this goal, but then you change the game. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, okay, well now, like this game that I was playing, all of a sudden, like, I don't like these rules anymore, and I want to go and play a different game. And maybe it's sort of in line, but like it's just a different distance. And it was like you're so close to getting there, but now that you see that it's possible and like you can make that happen, you're like, I'm just gonna fuck it all up again, and like let's push it up, and just continue to be hard on myself and push harder, and like whatever that is, without giving yourself the credit of all the things that you've been able to do. And you do need that perspective, but it's a blessing and a curse, because like you said, if you get to that point and you hit a wall, and you're not putting one foot in front of the other, like you just stop. And that's okay. You become quite comfortable, but then you realize, all right, I'm going to stand here and look around, and this is now where I'm going to be. This is where I'm going to stick my flag and decide that this is okay and be perfectly happy here. And that works for so many people.
Yeah.
But there's a small group of people that are just like, no, there's no way that I made it here. This is cool. It's not what I've expected. I need to move the flag further down, because somewhere between the flag where it is right now and the flag where I decide to put it, somewhere in there, I'm going to find a version of myself, or find this feeling, this sense of enjoyment, this sense of happiness, this sense of accomplishment that you chase. But it does continue to put that flag further and further down the road. And so it's so incredibly important that in the good times and the bad times, you do reflect back and understand that really you have come a long ways. You have all this experience now, and you're doing well, even when you think that you aren't. You've come a long ways. You've played the game. You're playing the game. And the big thing is loving the process. As soon as you stop loving the process, it's game over.
Yeah.
And so many people run into situations where they come up across these problems, and they become maybe major, like fairly significant problems. But one thing that people don't give enough credit for are the problems that they have, and being thankful enough that they're in a position where they're now being served with an opportunity to solve these types of problems. Yeah. Versus the very small problems that you know, what might seem like a small problem to some seem like a massive problem to you. That's where you don't want to end up. That's certainly where I don't want to end up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think something I had heard, I don't remember where I heard it now, but specifically kind of for entrepreneurs and this whole moving the goalpost thing, this woman was saying that a good way to try to catch that is to visualize, like close your eyes, visualize what success looks like for you. Like, what does it look like? Where are you? Who are you with? What are you wearing? What can you see? What are you doing in that moment? Like, to think about a very specific moment. And I remember her example was, that it was just, a Saturday morning with her family, with her children, having breakfast, and she was in the kitchen with the family, and she was looking out onto the mountains in this beautiful home, and she was wearing this dress, and it was, I remember that moment because I'm thinking that's such a good way. And the reason is that when you visualize it so vividly, when it happens, you're more likely to catch it and say, wow, this is the thing that I was dreaming of the whole time. So even if you've moved the goalpost since then, you can kind of catch that moment and be like, this was the original success to me. This is what we were working towards. So I've kind of always kind of held on to that too, and it makes me check myself, because I'm way closer to that than I give myself credit for sometimes. But yeah,
and I think a lot of people are. A lot of people are a lot closer to those goals than they think. And back to I do want to come back to remind me that we had this conversation about closer than you think. If you can remind me those words, closer than you think, it's going to trigger my next question after this that I had. But one thing that you had you mentioned was rock bottom, right? You had said you'd never really gotten to this place where it was like what you would describe as being a rock bottom, and kind of wondering what that might have been like. And some people find that, and I think some people go searching for that, and they have to, and they feel that they have to hit rock bottom before they end up succeeding, because you hear so many stories of entrepreneurs of, this was my life. I did this, and then I absolutely hit rock bottom, and my life didn't change until I went through this like really dark time that was really, really difficult. And I wish that nobody has to go through that, but ultimately that was what kickstarted me to change my life and move in this direction. So the rock bottom moment has been something that a lot of people, I think, seek after. And I don't think that that's a great way to do it. I don't think you have to hit an absolute rock bottom in order to start creating a new life. Like, I understand that there's, emotion creates motion, right? Say that a lot. And until there's real emotion there that drives you to change, the outcome is probably going to be not that different from where you are now. But what if right now, and you're in a pretty good situation, what if whatever it is that you're going through, and maybe you're in a pretty happy relationship, maybe you have a nice little home and you're pretty happy at your job, but what if that in itself is the rock bottom? Is there any reason why you couldn't push that forward? And I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think that you need to hit a rock bottom in order to feel like what you're doing is becoming a success. I don't think that you have to.
I agree with you. And just to clarify, I don't think you have to hit rock bottom to be able to hit success. But I think when I think about it, I think it's the same as when you're in a job that's okay, but you're not very happy. It's like, I think, what they call like the golden handcuffs, right? You're in a job, it pays well, but you're miserable. You clock in, you clock out, and it makes it really hard to then push yourself out to try and do something else, whatever that is, whether it's find a new job, start your own business. I think that people get complacent, and I'm guilty of it too. So, I'm not talking about other people. I think that it's human nature generally to say, well, okay, well, it's not that bad. And I think when you do have one of these rock bottom moments, whatever that looks like for you, I'm sure nobody goes out looking for those things, but when it happens, whether it's addiction or loss or homelessness or whatever that looks like in those really awful extreme cases, that you're pushed so hard that, just like you said, with emotion drives motion, like you are forced to take action and do these things. Whereas when you are quite complacent because you've got a job that pays pretty well and the family's happy and you're just going through the motions, then it's very easy to just stay in that spot. And I think that's the difference. So I don't think you need the rock bottom, but I think when you are forced into it, it pushes you to have that rocket momentum of the opposite direction. And when you're just middle level the whole time, you have to find a different, and I'm not in any way saying that it's more difficult to be there, but I'm saying that I think naturally you gravitate to just not push yourself in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's the metaphor of the thermostat, right? That you're probably familiar of, but in this room, there's a thermostat, and Ed Milet does a really great job of describing this. And so have, many others, Tony Robbins being one of them, but they describe there's this thermostat in your life, right? And whether it's with your bank account, whether it's with relationship, whether it's with your job, and your thermostat is set to a certain degree. And as long as you're kind of within that range, then there's no need to change the thermostat. But this is why so many people, they end up making money and then they end up self-sabotaging and losing all of that money. It's because they haven't reset their thermostat to understand like this is the new normal. And so it's the same thing with relationships, right? You might be at a point where you've gone through a really ugly relationship, and this has sort of been a trend, and you find somebody that you start falling in love with, and they start falling in love with you, and you end up at some point being like, all right, this is getting too hot. I need to cool this down. So you do something real dumb that's going to like just kick up some chaos because that's what you're used to. And you're like, oh, this is where I feel comfortable. And it sounds sort of weird, but that's the reality of it. And I think one of the scenarios here is if you can imagine, all right, you're moving, here's sort of the post, right? Here's kind of your boundary, your thermostat, and you're driving towards this thermostat, and you hit a point, okay, it gets hot, you cool off a little bit, you try so hard, you put all your efforts in, maybe like business is not going the way that you wanted to, you don't have enough money, so you drive towards this line, you hit this thermostat, and then you ease off the brakes a little bit, and or hammer on the brakes a bit, and all of a sudden you're putting a tremendous amount of effort just to get to this baseline, but then you stop, and you never change that thermostat or break through when all of that effort that you should be putting in is like on this side. So why don't we put all that time and effort and drive into continuing momentum, so that like on this side of that thermostat becomes that new normal. But we never put the same kind of energy and excitement and drive and work ethic on this side of things, so we never get to see those benefits. When I say we, it's like a very large blanket statement in general, but that's what happens so many times. So it's like, if we went hard as hell on like work ethic in this like success side of things, and on this side of the thermostat, it would inevitably like push, and now all of a sudden that new baseline just has to catch up with you versus you catching up with it. But that rarely happens in so many cases.
Yeah. I think it's really tough to understand the difference of what you were just explaining, because I think when people work hard, they think, well, I'm working really hard, and I don't think that I think that it's very easy to talk about the analogy, but understanding the reality of like, okay, well, where is that limit, and how do I make that new normal further ahead, And so I think that's why people get stuck. I don't think that's a very easy thing to do at all.
It's not an easy thing to do at all, right? And that's why so many people end up stuck in those same situations, in those same patterns, is because so much effort goes into just regulating the thermostat, versus if you kind of hit that point and you keep going and you keep moving, then when you really start to turn that up, like that's where all the effort should be going, is on the other side, so you can start seeing the benefits and success, and actually the compounding interest of your efforts is on the other side of that.
Yeah.
I mean, take that, if you're listening, take that for what it is, and play that to whatever might be happening in your life right now. But if you're in a relationship and things seem to be going really well at home, now's not the time to ease off. That's the time where you double down those efforts wherever that got you to this point that's been going really well. Like, double down on that, because that's going to set that new programming in your thermostat for what the standard should be. Or in business, right? If it's revenue targets, if it's number of doors that you're looking to purchase, right? You whatever that is, get to that point, and if that starts slowing down, all of a sudden, like, you're putting in all this effort to get back up to that revenue level or whatever that is, and then you get to that revenue level and you kind of breathe and you're like, that feels good. Like, okay, we're back on track. But you're not really back on track. You're still off track.
Yeah.
You need to go just as hard on the other side of that and keep that momentum going. And then you can set that new baseline and decide when's going to be the right time for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
I had another question there that came up. I told you to remind me to
Closer
say
than you think.
Closer than you think. Yes. Okay. So thank you for reminding me.
If I hadn't have written it down, I probably wouldn't have remembered.
Fair enough. I'm glad you wrote it down. I was looking for a pen to make them, and I realized, okay, my pen's over there and the microphone's here, so I'm not going to get up and go and get the pen.
You're good.
But you're closer than you think, right? When it comes to real estate and investing, you mentioned this wholesaling, right, is sort of one way of getting into real estate, generally with zero money down, right? I think so many people, they are closer to having the ability to invest into real estate than they think. Would you be able to share maybe some of the mindset blockers that people have, and tactically some of the ways that they could get involved in real estate investing if they had little money, no money, but like a low barrier to entry to kickstart things, to kickstart their ability to start investing into the real estate market?
Yeah. Well, for me, Because I think I had this, belief that I had to have a lot of money. And so for me, it was just about actually, I had this limiting belief that I needed more money, but I actually never got the evidence of that. It was one of those like, well, I don't have enough money. And so I just never even looked into it. And so I quickly realized once I started actually doing research and learning more about all the different options that I actually didn't need that much money. And so for me personally, the first property I bought was as an owner occupied, and so I was able to put a lot less money down for the mortgage. So that in itself was like a huge benefit of not being able to put much money down. I ended up investing in Ohio, and the cost of houses there is way less than New York, which is where I was living at the time. And obviously this is all completely circumstantial because it depends on your environment, but if that's an option for you, something like house hacking might be something that's really suitable to be able to start the process and at least buy a property and be able to do it at a more affordable price. So for me, it was an owner occupied property. I was able to put 5% down instead of 20%. And there's so many other options also, even with mortgages. There's plenty of different, even investment style mortgages that you can get that you might not need 20% to put down. So I think just educating myself about the actual options that were out there rather than just thinking to myself, oh, I can't afford it or I don't have enough money. That seems so obvious and it sounds kind of dumb for me to say it out loud, but that's what it was. That was just this limiting belief that I had. And when I actually started learning the facts, it was actually more accessible than I had realized before. But now with what I know is that generally when you could partner with somebody and you're either giving up time or money for the most part. And so if you have the time and you can partner with somebody that has the money, that's also a really great way to come in with little to no money in the game, to be able to get started. And obviously it depends what you're doing, but if you have the time to learn and understand the processes and find good deals, wholesaling as an example, if you can find these really good deals, then maybe you can partner with somebody that has the money and be able to share some equity or, find some way to make some money from that deal. And I think really what this came down to for me is getting into different communities just to understand the conversations that people were having. And it's so important to be in the right room, right? To be able to connect with people that are doing things that you want to do, because then that's how you're really going to understand how are people really operating in this space. Like, let me understand the ins and outs of what's going on. And so for me, that was like Facebook communities. I was just going on Facebook groups and let me just observe the conversations that are happening in this group. Let me try and pick up on some of the things, even the questions that other people are asking. I can learn so much from what other people are asking and what other people are answering. And so that just opened my eyes in so many different ways to, like I said, understanding the different ways to make money, understanding how to access people that might want to partner, understanding about, equity share and private money and all these different ways that you can connect. And if you've got the time, you don't necessarily have to have the money.
You mentioned house hacking. For those that aren't familiar with house hacking, can you give us a bit of insight as to what that is? Because I think that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, so I think generally it comes from either buying a single family home and renting out the rooms, or buying a multi-family home and renting out the other units. So you can buy, forgive me if I'm wrong because I haven't looked into this for a long time, but I think you can buy a 4-unit on like a personal, on a mortgage, an owner occupied mortgage, and live in one of the units and rent out the other 3. So obviously you would be taking on the the mortgage of a much bigger property, but you can factor in the rent from those units to cover the mortgage payment. So you wouldn't have to qualify for that huge amount just based on your income alone. You can factor in the other units' rent.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something that I loved hearing was you bought a place in Ohio when you were living in New York because real estate was a lot less expensive in Ohio than it was in New York. Uh, very like I try and push that as much as I can, right? If you are interested in getting into real estate, you can purchase where you can afford and certainly rent where you want to live, right? If you can't afford to buy a place where it is that you want to live. And in fact, there's a lot of benefits to that too, right? But there's a lot of joy in certainly owning your own home, but there's also a lot of maintenance and a lot of cost that comes with it to own and live in a a single family home. Whereas, I bought a house and I was telling you, or we were talking offline before we started recording, I had bought this house. It was about $350,000. It was a 4-story home in another province. And I bought that because it was that same house here in the Vancouver area that I'm recording out of right now is going to be about $4.5 million versus $450,000 or $350,000. I think it was under $400,000. But the rent more than covered that, right? It cash flowed. No, I didn't live there. No, I didn't want to live there, but the numbers made sense, and that gave the ability to access a line of credit, and I was able to put some money down, and that gave the ability to rent out the top and bottom. Did end up doing the short-term rental thing on the bottom unit for a little while, but my point being is there's a lot of opportunity out there that is outside of your backyard, and you don't have to live in the house that you own.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in a very fortunate position where I work for myself, so I work remotely. So I was actually able to buy the property in Ohio as owner occupied, and I moved there to renovate it. So I bought it as needed a complete renovation, mostly cosmetic. So it wasn't a huge amount of work otherwise, but I was able to actually go to the property and get hands on. And that just suited my position at the time. But like you said, it's totally accessible to do. Even without an owner occupied mortgage, there's still options that you can get, renovation loans that you can get, different types of investment loans that might not even require 20% down. But also, if you're looking at a house that's, for me, it was I think it was about $105,000 I bought this house for, which in Ohio, it makes much more sense. um, but yeah, even that with the additional money to do the renovations, it was way more affordable. If I was looking at the same thing in New York, it would have been, at least 500,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about what's going on with Aros. So this was your platform. You're building on it. You're renting units out. You're getting people connected with unique spaces. What was your idea of this was something that you wanted to start? How did you get involved in this particular business, and where did this idea and this platform come from?
Yeah. So when I bought this house in Ohio, I knew that the numbers panned out as a long-term rental and a midterm rental. And so that's when I really decided if I'm going to try this as a midterm rental, then I'm just going to go all in and learn everything I can about midterm rentals. And so I joined a community. I started learning about different people, different niches that need midterm rentals. And that led me to start connecting with insurance relocation companies. And this is really where it kind of started with the whole relationship building. And I think naturally my experience in my career over my lifetime has pretty much always been involved in sales, customer service, or hospitality of some sort. And so connecting with people comes quite naturally to me. So it made sense for me to just start connecting with the people that needed the housing. I have this house. Hey, you want to rent it? Like, let me come right in front of you and let you know I have this thing right here. And so it just so happened that they would then say to me, "Hey, Abby, like, do you have anything in Austin, Texas?" And I'd be like, "No, but I know somebody in Austin, Texas. Let me see if they have availability." And that's kind of how it started. So I would go to my network, people I had met through Facebook communities or people at conferences or in my, in the communities that I was a part of, and say, "Hey, anyone got something in Norfolk, Virginia? I'm looking for a 3-bed, 2-bath with a fenced in backyard," or whatever. And so I started building this business by just kind of connecting the dots. And we did really well. But that led me to realize that the process for relocation companies specifically, there's kind of a lot of parts to this, but first and foremost, I think, was the realizing the families and the impact that it has for them. I had never really considered this before, but when something happens to your home and you are displaced, these people are going through possibly the worst thing they've ever experienced, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Thankfully I haven't, and that's why I had never really considered this before. But sometimes they've lost not only their home, pets, family members, maybe, it's complete tragedy. And you can't go home to your safe space, and so when you connect with these families and you start to understand what they're actually going through, it really kind of changed the game for me. And I said, my goal now, my mission is to find somewhere safe and comfortable for these families to live. And so, but then also, I would get to call my fellow real estate investor in Norfolk, Virginia, and say, like, "Hey, I've got a 6-month lease here for you. That's 6 months of consistent income with no vacancy. It's just a family that needs somewhere to stay while their home's being repaired." And so it was a really great opportunity for them too. And I'm helping out the relocation company. So like they get a great property delivered to their inbox and everybody wins. And so I really loved this spot to be in. But I started to realize that the process for relocation companies to find this housing was really quite time consuming and not very efficient. So, they would go to these platforms that exist already online and they would search using the map and they would use the filters and they would zoom in and say, "Okay, well, this one looks like it ticks all the boxes. Let me call the landlord or send an email." And then maybe you'll get their voicemail and maybe they'll call back in like 6 hours or maybe the next day and they'll say, "Oh, sorry, we already accepted another booking." And so, okay, let's keep going. And so it becomes this really long process of trying to find something for, Mr. and Mrs. I normally use Smith as the example. Mr. and Mrs.
I understand it's the most common last name on
It is.
the planet. So yeah.
It makes it even longer for them who are probably already displaced and staying in a hotel, which in itself is really uncomfortable. And so I thought of this system to be able to make it faster for the relocation companies. And so we created this platform where the relocation companies can create a housing request and they can say, "Hey, I need a 3-bedroom house in Norfolk, Virginia, 2 bathrooms, fenced in backyard." And it will automatically notify all the people on the platform that have a rental property within that radius for that location. And matching the size is the kind of predominant things that it matches on. And so then if that landlord has availability, they can submit their property to that housing request. So the next day or so, the relocation company can come back to their inbox and see a list of properties that not only meet the requirements of what they're looking for, but they know that are available. And so that then has become a place for real estate investors and for landlords to have a place where they can come and find B2B transaction contracts. They can get midterm rental tenants and, they're not worried about short-term rentals. They're not worried about people coming to party or vacation. They're not worried about constant turnover. They know exactly what they're getting. And so I'm in a very unique position where I am a landlord. And so I understand what landlords want. And I have also been working with these relocation companies. So I understand what they want. And so I really want to help educate both sides so that they can work together more seamlessly and everybody wins, and it's been a really cool process to kind of start developing this and get involved. And I really want to help more landlords understand midterm rentals and how to get these opportunities. And yeah, I mean, the demand was always there. And, there's houses are there and they're vacant. And it's like, I want them to connect.
This episode is sponsored by New Vision Projects, and everybody has heard the horror stories that happen. They have a friend of a friend or a neighbor that's been renovating for years on end, or they've been building a home and it just hasn't gone the way that it needed to go. Budgets are blown through the roof, timelines, forget about them. New Vision Projects has an incredibly strong track record for over 15 years of working with customers, serving them at the highest level. If you are considering building or renovating, check them out on Instagram at New Vision Projects or at newvisionprojects.com. Building the homes you want with the confidence you need. New Vision has you covered. Let them show you why they're different. Back to the show.
More easily, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a exceptionally very cool platform. I love what you're doing with it. I had a situation where my mom's house burnt down, and I've told the story a handful of times on the podcast. It was a bit of a pivotal moment for me because that's how I ended up getting into construction. But you're right? What's going on is it's wildly intrusive. She was renting a place up top, and there was a tenant down below. My parents had just split up, and my mom was living on her own at this place, and there was a woman down in the basement, the lower half of the house, and she was an addict, right? She was a pill addict, and she had taken some pills, had fallen asleep. She was also an alcoholic, and a hoarder. And the landlord wouldn't do anything to get her out, but she ended up falling asleep and just letting some candles burn. And because there was so much shit in the house, it ended up catching fire. But it was, it was pretty devastating. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Everybody got out. That was all good. But all the things, right? Like the photos that family photos that you lose, just these moments, plus furniture and everything that you hold dear to you is all of a sudden now gone. And you're very thankful that you made it out with the clothes on your back. And the restoration of it was wild. They managed to save the house, but it was not a quick process. Insurance companies get involved. They kind of battle over whose issue it is. What happened, how much is this going to cost, gathering quotes from builders that are going to do the restoration and everything, right? And it took a huge amount of time. And in the middle of that was my mom, who was like, I need to still have a place to stay for my kids, because we were quite young and kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit between mom's place and dad's place. And she was like, I need a place. This is going on. I don't care, honestly, about all my stuff. I'll get to that in a moment, but I need a place where my kids can come and still be with me and have some sort of resemblance of a stable home. And that was, became a very difficult thing for her to find. And she ended up lucking out and ended up eventually finding a place to stay. And that was where I got into construction. Actually, it was sort of a side note. I was helping her move all her furniture that was that we had to buy new furniture, but got her some furniture, was helping her move down. And then the landlord ended up being a recruiter for a large construction company, and I was 17 at that time, and decided that all right, that makes sense to try out construction. And I got asked if I wanted to try it out. Anyways, that's a whole other story for another time. But my point being is it's very uncomfortable. Yeah. And that process alone is, if you're going through that, if you've never been through that before, and I hope that nobody ever does have to go through something like that. Yeah. But there's so much emotion tied to it. There's so much just on that lower end that they don't want to deal with, battling with insurance companies, battling with trying to find a place to stay, like none of that is exciting. It's not like booking an Airbnb down in Maui and like this is a fun vacation we're going to go and book and have some, fun booking sightseeing stuff. It's like, no, none of this is what we want to deal with. We need somebody to just take this off of our plate and handle this and find us a place so that we can go on living our lives and starting to rebuild it. Then you can be that person.
Yeah, and I think that was, you touched on some really good points there, because I think a lot of people don't realize not only you can imagine the stress of having your place burned down is terrible, or whatever it is that happens to it. But you've got the stress of battling with contractors and insurance companies and permits and delays, and there's so many expenses, unexpected expenses that that they have to shell out for. And so, you imagine all of that on top of being stuffed into a hotel, and sometimes you've got pets. And, sometimes I was talking with somebody yesterday about how sometimes the pets can come to the hotel room with you and they're stuffed in the hotel room with you. And sometimes they can't, and they have to stay in kennels until you can find a property to stay in. And so there's so many factors involved here. And, some of the people that I deal with, especially the older people, who they don't really know how to use the technology of like background checks, or some of them have never rented before in their lives. They bought their home 50 plus years ago and they've just lived there the whole time, and they've never even had to rent a property before, so they don't understand how any of this stuff works. And so I love being able to guide someone through that process and being able to just take a little bit of extra time to just help them understand, hey, this is what's going to happen. These are the steps, and I'm going to make it as easy as possible for you. And I really love being in that spot. And although the dealing with the families is actually, I love being able to do that. And by creating the platform, I've kind of taken a step away from that, and it's more about helping the landlords. But I hope that I'm also able to help the landlords understand what this means for the families and how beneficial they can be to these families by just taking an extra 10 minutes to explain this process to them and kind of guide them through it. And I was really surprised by just how humble all of the families I work with are. They're just so grateful that we're there to help. There's that. I thought that, the stress that people would be under, that their attitude and their mindset would be different, but they're just so grateful for the help. And that's why I think I always just want to lead with kindness and empathy and just be like, I just want to help you through this. And I know this is a really stressful time and you probably don't understand what's going on, so let me explain it for you. And I love that spot.
I love that. Abby, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and breaking this all down for it. It was super fun to have you. And thanks so much. I know again it's Friday evening where you are, and the fact that you're rolling into your weekend and still here hanging out on the microphone with us is awesome. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm at the Abi Horton. And if you send me, give me a follow, send me a DM with the word Brandon, then I'll send you my setting up my midterm rental checklist to make sure you've got all you need for your rental property. And then we also do have a page for Aros. So you can find us at stay.aros on Instagram, and the website is stayaros.com. So if you want to check out, if you have a rental property that you want to list, you can check that out there.
Awesome. We'll make sure that we get that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And to all of our listeners that are out there and still with us, again, I'm here rooting for you to win. And as always, have a great day. And until next time, stay blessed. Rock and roll. Peace.